actually, the advanced ATI was actually slightly lower each year by a couple of $1,000s. So, but again, I couldn't go back in and say that.
CTI?
Sorry, CTI.
Don't mix
Sure that
don't mix the
no,
acronyms.
I did not want to mix them together. Let me just bring this up and I can just tell you. So, in 2008-9, CTI basically billed out at $95,000, $95,500 in 2009-10. They billed us for $113,800, and then in 10-11 is when the switch occurred in advanced interpreting, charges at $92,700, and in 11-12 last year is $111,000. So again, if you just look at those years, they're very comparable in what we paid for. I was not able to get an hour breakdown to determine, you know, if the number of hours were equal, but at least what we paid out to both firms were very comparable.
And that doesn't show that the hours served were comparable. And again, I will, you know, maintain that I think one of our jobs is to look at being the most fiscally conservative that we can, and that's why I think it's a duplication of services, and to accept a higher price company is not a responsible action.
I think Ms. Hanson's correct, and I think providing staff with direction to go back and negotiate contracts with these 4 vendors makes the most sense. I mean, then ATI, AIS, then AIS is simply told, these are the pricing, this is the pricing that our district is going to use moving forward. If you're prepared to provide that price, services for those prices, you know, we're interested in entering into a contractual agreement with you, and we move forward. I mean, I think given the fact that CTI has exhibited some issues in the past, they may or may not exhibit issues moving forward. It gives AIS the mandate that you're going to have to be able to work within these financial constraints. They've been providing us good service, and most importantly, 2 things. We get the right pricing, but we ensure to our students and our community that we're able to provide this service without any interruption, and I think that's, you know, we can't absolutely be sure of that given that we had to release CTI in the past. So that would be the only reason why, given the way the motion structured now, I would vote against it in hopes that we would provide staff the direction to negotiate these contracts.
So I have some other questions. And you're aware of a couple of these questions. I asked if we had any translators that the district employed themselves, because these numbers could conceivably imply that perhaps we should look at employing some translators within the district. And would you provide that information, please?
Sure. Right now, we only have one person that does translations. She's not officially called a translator. That's Patricia Becerra. She's the Community Service Coordinator based at Willow Creek. Primarily works with the DLAC, and she does do some trainings at the site, so she uses her language for that. She's come to these meetings as well, and she's provided translation with the headsets. But she's not officially the translator. There is such a description, and both Kristen and I are looking at that description and the price range, which would be conceivable to be done in the future, to hire our own translator. I need to state, though, when you hire a translator, that is one person.
Correct.
That can only be in one place at one time. That's why a large company can access more people at the same time.
Right, and I recognize that we have that complexity in the district. I also recognize that we do need a vendor that can provide multiple language, even though Spanish is probably our predominant requirement in translation. I recognize that some of our office managers receive I believe it's a 5% stipend for translating work when they're translating at a school site, but I don't know how complex that work is when they're translating. Is it for an IEP type situation, or is it just for general communication between the student or the student's family and the school staff?
Mostly it's for newsletters. For an office manager to be paid the extra for that. For the technical piece, I'll have to defer to Christian, because I believe there is some certification that's needed for that part.
Okay.
We do try to use in-house whenever possible, particularly for translating documents, but a lot of times it's difficult to fit in the workday with all their other
fortunate that Dr. Mills actually brings with her experience from Santa Barbara, where she did in-house training and trained her support staff members to actually go through a 2-hour training and then be certified to be able to sit in IEPs and help translate IEPs. So we are looking at being able to work with both our CST and CSEA members to see if they'd be interested in these out of the school day opportunities, but if they're willing to do the training types of things.
So in my asking the question about the volume, and I do not want to indicate that I want translation services diminished, because I believe actually there may be an increase in those service requirements. I'm hoping that we will have a blend of both our own staff ability as well as the outside translators, because I understand that there is the difficulty in sheer numbers, especially with the IEPs that occur after school and before school. So the hours are very different. I had a question because I looked at a couple of the previous contracts agreements with one or both of these, the multiple vendors, in that it says they are reimbursed mileage. Is that for mileage within our district, or is that mileage if the translator lives in Oakland and has to commute to Concord High School? Can you
That
explain?
was one of our questions, was specifically on mileage, and both companies had different radius. The CTI company said they would go as far as 40 miles before they charged us. So if somebody lived in Fremont, let's say, an Indian translator, they would be paid mileage, because that is far. It's
Right.
further than that. If they lived in Oakland, they probably would not get charged. The other company, however, AIS, said their radius would be 15 miles, if I recall.
But is it, the question I think also was, is the radius based on their home location?
My understanding, it's the home.
So it's commuting to Mount Diablo School
Correct.
District from the residence of the translator.
Correct.
Okay. And they, does the 2-hour time limit or time requirement include the travel time as well, or is it strictly translation time?
Strictly translation.
Okay, so that's a good clarification, thank you.
Can I ask Mrs. Mayo one question that's just related to that, if you don't mind?
Certainly.
With using our staff, because she's asking about the 2-hour minimum, that is a problem in the contracts, because sometimes you don't need 2 hours, you need 15 minutes. So if we use in-house staff in those translations, would we have the flexibility to pay for 15 minutes rather than the 2-hour minimum?
Well, you're talking about the 5%?
When they require that it be a 2-hour, and maybe it's not a 2-hour translation session.
So that was one of the questions we asked during the process when we asked about flexibility. Some of the translators, for example, Victor charges just for actual translation time with no minimum. And CTI said they would be willing to be flexible with us on that 2-hour requirement, particularly if we're using some local translators. Whereas AIS said that was the industry standard, which it is, and was not willing to be flexible and work with us on that. Same thing with Evelina, is that the industry standard, which she tends to do, is group her work, so she only has to translate orally for an hour. She'd spend that second hour doing written translations, which we give her plenty of work on. So that's how she gets around the 2-hour minimum. But in general, we have to pay it for it. An IEP lasts 45 minutes, we're still paying the 2 hours.
But the answer would be, if we were using our in-house people, you're absolutely right. There wouldn't be a 2-hour minimum, and there could be some substantial cost savings generated.
And that was going to be my second proposal, which Mrs. Mayo was looking into.
Well, I recognize that at a particular site, we may not always have a staff member that speaks all of the various languages. I would expect primarily Spanish at most of our sites, and I'm not sure how many other languages would be available. So although I understand your concern, I'm not sure that we could always